me welcoming you to this IPPR event on how to build a cleaner and greener economy. I'm Karis Roberts, I'm Executive Director here at the IPPR. And today, the main theme of our event is going to be our Environmental Justice Commission, which we published over the summer. This was a really important piece of work for us. It was 2 years in the making, working with an incredible set of people to build a people-powered plan for a just transition. So today we're going to hear from a range of speakers. We're going to kick off with some remarks from Luke Murphy, who is Associate Director at IPPR and also Head of the Environmental Justice Commission. We're going to hear from Hilary Benn, who's just walked in. Welcome, Hilary. So Hilary is MP for Leeds Central, but he was also co-chair of our commission. So we're very pleased that he's able to join. We're going to hear from Lord Karen Bellamoria, who is president of the CBI and also founder of Cobra Beer. And finally, we're going to hear from Angela Francis, who is Chief Advisor, Economics and Economic Development at WWF UK. Angela is also on our commission as a commissioner, so we're very pleased to welcome her here. We will also be hopefully hearing from Polly Billington, Chief Executive of UK 100, a network of local leaders committed to clean energy, clean air and climate action. Polly should be joining us a bit later around 1:15, so we'll squeeze her in when she arrives. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Luke to tell you a bit about the commission and its work.
Thanks very much, and hello everyone, really good to see everyone here. So as Kara said, I'm Luke, I'm head of the Environmental Justice Commission at IPPR. And the Commission's mission was simple when it was set up 2 years ago. It was focused on, yes, how we can tackle the climate crisis and restore nature, but also crucially combining it with how we can tackle economic and social injustice at the same time. And I think we were really pleased to hear some of these themes in Ed Miliband's speech yesterday to conference, where he set out the need to join together climate and economic justice. As Kara said, it was the product of 2 years work, and a key part of the report and the whole of the commission really was to put people at the heart of the process. Not for us as a think tank to tell others that people, to tell government that people should be at the heart of policy, but actually to do it ourselves. And our chairs, one of whom is here today, Hilary, and also Caroline Lucas from the Green Party and Laura Sands for the Conservatives, were always clear that actually people needed to be part of this process. So we held 4 citizens' juries across the UK in areas that were going to be particularly affected by the transition. So Aberdeenshire being affected by the oil and gas transition, Tees Valley in County Durham, an area which has 3 times the level of industrial emissions than the rest of the country, South Wales Valleys, an area that has obviously still retained a lot of carbon intensive industry, but has also been the victim of unjust transitions in the past, the effects of which many of the South Wales Valleys communities still feel today. And lastly, in Thurrock as well, which is a commuter town, and it also has a lot of house building targets as well, which is going to have a big effect on its natural environment. And we asked each of those communities, what does a fair transition look like to them? Not so that it was imposed by others, but actually what would it feel like? What would it look like? And I don't have time to do the report justice, the final report justice, which came out in July. There are 3 versions. The summary comes to just 10,000 words, and the longer version 70,000. You'll be pleased to hear there is a shorter, not longer, a shorter digital version also available if you would like to see that as well, with lots of kind of interactive content and videos from our jurors. So I don't have time to do it justice, but I do want to say, just outline the 6 things or the 6 takeaway messages that we kind of developed as a part of the final report and its conclusions. Firstly, and overall, was the idea that we need a new social contracts. That came through really clearly from the jurors that we spoke to. We need a new approach to addressing the climate and nature crises. First of all, that we need to move from it being a problem just to be mitigated to an opportunity to be seized. Might sound like a slightly odd thing to talk about when we're thinking about the climate crisis, because obviously the consequences are huge, concerning, and that they are already with us, impacting lives across the world. But actually, the people that we spoke to wanted or recognised rather that the transition to net zero and the restoration of nature could bring a huge dividend in the form of jobs, lower fuel bills, and cleaner air and all the health benefits that brings with it too. They wanted to see a focus on policy, not in just reducing emissions, but actually maximising the benefits of communities across the country, what were they called a people's dividend. But as with all of these aspects of this social contract, which we set out in the report, this will not be delivered by chance. It has to have policy that is specifically designed in order to deliver it. So just one of the things we call for as part of that people's dividend is free or more affordable local transport. Secondly, the idea that we need to move from fairness as an afterthought to fairness as a foundation. Too often, I think in climate and environmental policy, we design the environmental side and then worry about the fairness aspects later. Actually, if this transition is going to succeed, what our report finds and what people told us around the country was that fairness needs to be embedded from day one. And that's not just fairness, though it is crucially important for workers in carbon intensive industries and communities that are going to be affected, but it's also for consumers, it's across the generations, and also fairness across geographies and internationally as well. Thirdly, that this transition has to go from being done to people, but instead with and by them as well. They were very clear that they wanted a people-first approach. So that means things like participatory budgeting. It means rolling out citizens' juries and citizens' assemblies on a standard basis at local, regional and national level. So everyone has an opportunity to engage in some way, should they wish to, in the transition. Fourthly, the idea that we need to move from a top-down approach to one where we have clear national leadership, but also local delivery. The people we spoke to were clear that they wanted greater control, yes, as I was saying, but also the powers and the resources at a local level. A one-size-fits-all approach isn't going to work, as something we heard across every single area. Fifthly, the idea that we need to move from individuals and silos to a whole economy approach. So that doesn't just mean within government policy, so introducing something called a net zero and nature test. So every single pound spent by government, every policy that is made is run through a test. Is this compatible with net zero? Is it compatible with restoring nature? But also that approach has got to extend to the way in which government works. It's got to be a partnership with business. It's got to be a partnership with workers. It's got to be a partnership approach with communities. And we are going to need the institutions in order to deliver that. And finally, and this is something that came across really strongly, was that we need to move from climate alone to climate and nature together. I think it's fair to say that we think that climate is very much top of the agenda now, but actually nature deserves to be there too. It couldn't have been clearer that the people, the values that people across the country put on nature. There's no doubt that part of that is to do with lockdown, but also it's something that they can see, they can feel, and they can hear it, and they want policymakers to prioritise it just as they are beginning to prioritise climate too. So that the last one is about valuing what matters. So valuing nature in all of our decisions, but also valuing people's well-being and the impact that has, or the impact that nature has as well. Plenty more in the report. I'm sure we can get into some more of it in the discussion, but those are just the highlights.
Thanks very much, Luke. So I'm going to turn to each of our panelists for some comments. Do please be thinking of and preparing questions, because we're going to keep as much time as possible for audience questions, so consider that your warning. But I'm going to ask Hilary first for some reflections as co-chair of the discussion.
Well, Karis, thanks very much indeed. I was a late substitute because Ed Miliband was the co-chair, and then he went back into the shadow cabinet, and I received a call, and I'm really glad that I said yes, because I learned a lot. And I would urge you, I mean, Luke has done a brilliant job in summarising what the report seeks to do, but when you get the chance to read it, it takes you, took me in discussing it, debating it, hammering it into shape on a journey, the journey that we need to take as a society and a country. And it was a wonderful piece of work. There's some quite distinctive things about it. One was the contribution that the citizens' juries made to inform what we had to say. Second was we used a phrase in the end that was slightly provocative, deliberately so, to make a point, and we discussed it quite a lot. And the phrase was, the public have a veto on net zero. And the point being made, if you don't take people with you, if we don't take people with us as we make this journey, we are in trouble. And when you think about some of the specifics, and Luke and I in particular debated long and hard the question of home heating. I became known as I was probably the boiler bore on the commission, because I like to talk about what's going to replace the 22 million gas boilers in Britain that are going to have to come out. We need to focus on the practicalities. We talk about we've got to decarbonise home heating. It means that, well, 22 million existing boilers are going to have to come out because the gas is going to be cut off at some point. Otherwise, we're not going to get to net zero. Question, what is going to replace them? And the report goes into some detail about heat pumps, the technology that's available now. There's a debate about hydrogen, green hydrogen, when it may become available on a sufficient scale. But the fairness point, which is the other distinctive characteristic of this excellent report, is made when you consider this. I have many constituents who 2 months ago were finding it difficult to pay the gas bill. I've now got even more constituents who are going to find it difficult to pay the gas bill because of the recent enormous rise in the price of gas. They don't have 10 to 15,000 pounds to buy a heat pump. Never mind what's that going to cost in terms of electricity. Never mind will it require additional radiators to raise the level to that people have been used to. Never mind the genuinely tricky question of internal home insulation, which I won't detain you on at the moment. But to put it rather sharply, internal insulation means nice people knocking on your door and saying, hello, I've come to insulate the inside of your house. I'm going to make all your rooms smaller. Is that okay? And these are the practical questions which we will very soon confront as the 22 million homes work out, well, how am I going to move from heating and hot water and cooking from gas to a zero carbon source? And the point about fairness is absolutely fundamental. And I've just come hot, for apologies for being a bit late, from Rachel Reeves's wonderful speech where she committed the future Labour government to investment year after year in a zero carbon future, because we know we need to do it because the science tells us. We know we need to get on with it. The task now is to get on with it. We don't need to debate much more. The targets, I'm not sure we need further legislation apart from the bits in the report that would require a legislative basis. I really welcome establishing an equivalent body to the Committee on Climate Change for nature, because that's the other distinctive thing about this report. Nature has always tended to be a bit of an afterthought after you talk about climate. The two are indivisible. The two are interdependent. And having a body with the weight of the CCC saying, this is how we're doing on nature, nature restoration, loss of species, stopping, reversing, improving, would be really, really powerful. And we also know, and we are, I think, rational human beings, I hope, if we don't do this, it's going to cost us a lot more money than if we do. Now, that evidence is very clear. Nick Stern, in that groundbreaking report, The Economics of Climate Change, he said, look, folks, I've done the numbers. Nick is a brilliant economist. He said, this is the cost of not dealing with climate change, and this is the cost of dealing with climate change. Now, which one of those would you like to go for, business and the world? And not surprisingly, people look at that and say, well, Nick, I think we'll go with that one. But we need to invest what is required to achieve that. Because in the end, from the public's point of view, what do we rely on in life? We want a home that is safe and secure and warm. We need to be able to cook our food. We need to be able to get about. We need to make stuff in the industries and businesses in which we work. We need to transport goods across the country, across the world. And ultimately, what's going to work is zero carbon ways of doing all of those things that enable people to continue to enjoy those things that they have come to rely on. I think we can do it. I think we will need all of the means of technology at our disposal. That's another debate, which is a bit of diversion in the climate change discussion. people over here who say you cannot talk about technology, it's a scam to prevent us doing what's needed, as if there's something impure about using technology. My view is we'll need every single means at our disposal to do this. And as new technologies come on stream and they can demonstrate their capacity to contribute to zero carbon, then they will help to open up new options for households, for businesses. It was a fantastic project, and I want to end by applauding IPPR for having decided to do this, because it's a really, okay, now I would say this when I'm the co-chair, but it is a really, really impressive piece of work, and I would urge you to look at it, because it will help to bring all of us into the debates and discussions about the practical steps we need to take today. Indeed, we should have been doing it yesterday, but if you didn't do it yesterday, start doing it today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilary, for those remarks. I'll turn now to Lord Karen Benamoria for a perspective from business.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karis, and thank you to the IPPR for inviting me, but also congratulating you on this excellent Environmental Justice Commission report. Thank you, Luke, and thank you, Hilary, for what you've just said. It is music to my ears, and fantastic. Just to introduce myself, I'm president of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, the largest business organization in the country. And people think we speak for the FTSE 100 and the FTSE 250 and big business. Well, we do, but we also speak for 190,000 businesses and almost 200 of the leading trade associations, from the National Farmers Union to the Law Society, and which employ together 1/3 of the private sector workforce in this country. And we're international. We've got offices in Washington and Brussels and Beijing and Delhi. And we are very well resourced as an organization, work very closely with organizations like the IPPR. And 1 in 3 of the largest businesses in the UK have already committed, with a market cap of about £650 billion, have already committed to net zero by 2050. EY, the large firm, has, in the middle of the pandemic this year, said that they're going to go carbon negative this year. So it's one thing talking about these things, another thing actually doing it and committing to it. And Microsoft similarly have as well. And what I've seen in the pandemic, and we've worked very, very closely with government on a day-to-day basis, whether it's Number 10, whether it's the Treasury, whether the Department of Business, whether the Department of International Trade, we work closely with government. And I've seen what has not worked in this pandemic over the last 18 months is government trying to do its own thing on its own in a command and control manner. It has not worked. What has worked is when government has worked closely with business, with organizations like the CBI, and that this report very clearly says that there needs to be collaboration. And I can give you example after example. You want to ask me in the question and answer session about how the government has listened, whether it's the job retention scheme, whether it's the bounce back loans, whether it's mass testing throughout this pandemic, whether it's now this crisis with lorry drivers and the labor shortages. I can tell you time and again of organizations like the CBI spotting a problem and spotting the solution and going to government saying, we're not complaining, we've got a problem, we've got a solution here for you, listen to us, work with us. And when government has, it has worked. So we believe there should be a planning, there should be partnership, and there should be passion. I think you would hear from Hilary speaking now, he's genuinely passionate about this topic. I mean, it comes through from the way you expressed yourself just now. So I think we've got to be committed to it, and we've got to work together collaboratively. And what I'm really delighted with this report is the way in which it talks not just about climate change, but it also talks about nature, and it talks about biodiversity. And this year, Cambridge University, very senior, eminent economist, Sir Partha Dasgupta, produced his report on the economics of biodiversity. And he he described nature as our most precious asset. And responding to the Dasgupta review, our national treasure, Sir David Attenborough, said that it is the compass that we urgently need. He said, and I quote David Attenborough, "Economics is a discipline that shapes decisions of the utmost consequence, and so matters to all of us. The Dasgupta review at last puts biodiversity at its core by bringing economics and ecology face to face. By doing this, we can help to save the natural world, and in doing so, save ourselves." So it is as drastic as that. It is what Hillary has just been saying. It's not only the cost benefit, which is absolutely, it's there, it's stark, but it is about saving ourselves. And I've been in the House of Lords for 15 years. When I joined 15 years ago, I was one of the handful of, I think it was the third youngest peer in the House. I'm still one of the younger peers in the House. Our average age is 70. But one of my great friends, who I'm privileged to know, is Lord Martin Rees, who sits on the crossbenches with me, former Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, and the Astronomer Royal, former president of the Royal Society. And he said this just recently: "Our Earth is 45 million centuries old. But this century is the first one when species, ours, can determine the biosphere's fate." I mean, just think about that. It is so, so powerful. So it's up to us. It's up to us to prevent this. If we work together, I really think that we can do it. And before I conclude, two things CBI has done. We've produced our economic strategy for the next decade up to 2030. We think there's a £700 billion opportunity for this country if we seize the moment. And we have certain pillars, which includes a decarbonized economy. It includes the term global Britain, the international aspect. It includes the regions. And again, this report talks about that. I'd love to talk more about that in the discussion. We believe clusters have a major role to play in the regions, promoting clusters. And you've looked at certain regions, and the power of clusters is hugely powerful. And one quick example, of course, is Cambridge, which around the University of Cambridge was initially a tech cluster with companies like Acorn Computers and Arm. Now it's become a bioscience, life sciences cluster. So you've got the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. AstraZeneca is based in Cambridge. So that's the power of clusters is very important. And an inclusive economy. And the report talks very clearly about an inclusive economy. I've launched as the first ethnic minority origin president of the CBI. I've launched an initiative called Change the Race Ratio. And I'm happy to talk about that, which champions ethnic minority participation across business. And you talk to young people today, two things matter more to them than any other thing, survey after survey shows. And this report covers it very clearly. One, what really matters to young people is sustainability, the environment, biodiversity, nature, climate change really matters. The second thing that really matters to young people today is diversity and inclusion. And I'm so happy the report discussed. And skills is another area we focus on. And finally, business investment. We need to invest. We underinvest as a country. We need to invest, whether it's in green, whether it's in business. That investment needs to come through. And we recommend that. We've got various specific ways in which we recommend that investment takes place. So I will leave it there for now, but lots to discuss, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear more about what the CBI is doing. I'll turn now to Angela.
I feel like my job is almost done already, Paris. I don't think I've ever been on a panel before talking about net zero where every single panelist has talked about nature before WWF even get to speak. I feel I'm so happy. I'm still going to talk about nature, but I'm so happy that I'm not the only one doing it. And I think it's a really fantastic illustration of how the Environmental Justice Commission brought those two topics together, but it's come through so clearly for everybody. And looking at climate and nature together for us is so important because after the pandemic that we're experiencing, a zoonotic disease that comes and press against nature too hard. It's a risk we can't keep ignoring. We really need to look at these things differently. And as Luke said, during this lockdown, I think people reappraised what they wanted out of life, and spending more time in nature became really important to people. up to half of people said in surveys that they've spent more time in nature, they want to continue spending more time in nature. And the citizens' juries really picked out their local environment, local nature was really important to them. And I think that's something they want to see in their communities when we invest in and build back. So we see climate and nature as these twin environmental crises, stricken by the same broken patterns of consumption and production, which we've got to change. And it's especially true in the food system, so it's useful to talk about that. And there's a fantastic chapter about the food system in the report, where there's opportunities to do things better, better health outcomes, better nature outcomes, and especially tackling that for the poorest in society. And it's really important to think about that at the moment. As we know, we're facing increasing food prices, all these things which start stressing the system, that we can look for better ways. My sense is the current government is starting to understand this, and they've put a policy framework in place, but they need to have much stronger commitments. So we've got, some of you might know, a public money for public goods system reform coming through the farming system, which is backed up by money, but it doesn't necessarily have the appropriate standards. It doesn't have the enforcement regime. And at the moment, it's being massively undermined by our trade policy. So we've got a complete disconnect between environment policy and trade policy, and that's a huge problem. In the Environment Bill, we've got big commitments on nature, and that's the first time the UK's had those. But at the moment, we've only got a requirement for public bodies to look at nature from time to time. And we've got a focus on deforestation only where it's illegal in the country that's deforesting. And that's not going to be enough. And so we need to go much further. So what we're looking for is targets and frameworks to deliver on nature much more quickly. In the decade of delivery that we hope follows COP, we want to see nature right at the start of that. I've gone backwards in my notes rather than forwards. And really that this is a way of delivering more quickly and more effectively. It's not a way of slowing us down, it's a way of avoiding a false route. So we avoid going down carbon sinks, which are only pine forests, which give us no nature outcomes and have become sort of monoculture dead zones. We avoid going down trade routes, food routes, which are very focused on low carbon agriculture only. And then you get there by doing really intensive agriculture, which is not the kind of solution you need, the kind of thing that you get in Australia and New Zealand, exactly what we want to avoid in the UK. So this report has importantly got recommendations on food. It's also got recommendations on trade, which are around having core standards for all UK imports, which has been a recommendation that's been made by the Trade and Agriculture Commission, the National Food Strategy, the Committee on Climate Change, and the government is still not listening. So we've still got this huge problem that we're heading towards trying to improve our own food system while importing the worst from the rest of the world. And when you look at the report, and do look at it, I strongly recommend having a good read. It's got a lot about the production systems and enabling citizens in this new greener economy. And if we get that right, I think it's going to make the UK a really interesting place. I don't know if CBI agree, but I think there's lots of things that would be very attractive to businesses that want to start businesses that are a new green model. It's about coming somewhere like the UK that's actually mainstream and making it possible for people to make different choices. So I think one of the things that's going to be most exciting about this decade of delivery is that the sustainable business options that actually solve a scaling problem, solve those justice problems, make a proposition to customers that isn't knocking on the door and just saying, can I make your room smaller? It's saying, how can I save you energy? How can I move your boiler and give you more space in a different part of your house? You're going to have to create a proposition, because at the macro level, although we know making these investments is going to pay us all back over time, there is going to be an upfront investment. It's the same is true at the personal level. The people who are getting the benefits are maybe the richest households who can invest in the insulation or buy the solar panel or heat pump. And we need to be able to get into a system where it's a shared endeavour. And if you really scale, we've got to make it possible for people who are on lower and medium incomes to also enter into those propositions, and they get benefits of better housing, green mobility, access to nature, good food, improved health, and that's got to reach everybody. And there's ways of doing that, and it's a lot of it is about coming up with propositions that aren't about people who own their own assets. You don't own your own car, so you get the scrappage scheme. You own your own house, so you get access to the building grant. We need to find different ways of doing that. So the report's got loads of those in there, and I think that's going to be one of the most important contributions the UK can make to the global story, is actually making not just the technology, but making the scalable solutions and the fairness propositions that the rest of the world can copy. So that's all I'll say now. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Angela. I've got a few quick fire questions for some of you. Hilary, I wondered if I could start with you. And obviously our commission was cross-party. What do you make of the Conservative government's progress on this agenda, and what would the clear water with Labour be?
Well, I think look at what the Committee on Climate Change said. It was Labour's legislation, the Climate Change Act, which established carbon budgets, and the Committee on Climate Change says that the government is off track. And if you're off track and you're serious, that's why I made the point earlier about the distinction between commitments and do you have a plan to deliver? And that is the issue of COP. It's just rapidly approaching. Every world leader, president, prime minister, who says, yeah, we are committed to this, the follow-up question is, yeah, but have you got a plan to do it at home? Because if you haven't got a plan to do it at home, then we're not going to meet the target as a world. And my biggest criticism, because the objectives are fair enough, my biggest criticism is that there isn't a plan yet to make the change for heating homes and businesses, for moving about, for changing the way stuff is made. And those are all of the elements. And I fear, actually, that the recent huge rise in gas prices might cause the government to think, we probably might just hold off a bit on producing the long-awaited heat strategy, whatever it's called, the plan for how we're going to decarbonise our homes, because one of the first questions when it appears will be, isn't this going to cost people more money at a time when people can't afford the bills that are coming in now? But and that's what we should focus on. And sometimes in this debate, energy is diverted into, we need another bit of legislation. I'm not sure that is the priority. The priority is to get the government to do its job and come forward with practical plans that will make the change. And we should allow nothing to divert us from that, which is why the report is stuffed full of good ideas as to how that can be done.
Thank you very much. And so my question to you would be, how do you relate the nature and fairness agendas? What would it look like to restore nature in a fair way?
So one of the things I think is in the report, or if it's not in the report, I'm going to talk about it in the course of it, is people who live in nature-rich areas have better health outcomes, they've got a better quality of life. One of the things I think that's going to be quite interesting as we have a different settlement on work-life balance and where we live is improving our public realm and the places we live in. We need to do huge amounts of tree planting, and most of that's going to be, in the countryside and out there. But actually, there's lots of things we can do to make our urban areas a lot more attractive, cooler, more pleasant places, reduce air pollution. So I think one of the things about nature outcomes is they're very evident to people. Like, we absolutely have to reduce our carbon emissions, of course, but people aren't going to feel that. But what they are going to feel and see is more pocket parks, more green spaces, more verges left to wildflower, more nature in their local areas. I think those things are going to be a key part of it. I think also in terms of farming, because we have got such huge changes going on in our farming system, I think people are interested and hopefully excited about having good quality food as a part of this. I mean, people are looking at their diets, maybe choosing a less of a meat-based diet. I think people are also choosing, like, how can I engage with what's produced locally, what's happening in my local area, and supporting regional markets. I mean, one of the things that's really, really hard in some of the most deprived areas is you have these effectively food deserts where you can't get quality food. There's more chicken shops than there is grocers, and I think it's really it'll be interesting to see how, with maybe some of the changes that are being proposed around business rates and other things, how can we make some units that were previously shops do something to kind of make healthy foods accessible for people in towns. I think probably those would be my top suggestions.
Great. And then, Karen, you mentioned regional inequalities, and we know that regional inequalities currently are the most salient type of inequality amongst British voters. Could you say a bit more about what you think the main opportunities are from the Green Agenda and how they could be realised?
Yes, I mean, if I mentioned about clusters, the whole concept of clusters, I gave Cambridge as one example, but if you go around the whole country, there are many, many clusters linked to different industries that we could promote. And quite often there'll be a university or universities that are in the region as well. So you take Bristol, you've got an aerospace cluster. You take Teesside, you've got wind power. You take Edinburgh, you've got financial services. You go to Northwest, you get defense. So there are many, in the Midlands, you have engineering and automobiles. Many ways we can do this. And when it comes to the decarbonization of homes, so I chaired the Heat Commission at the CBI when I joined as vice president before becoming president. And last year, after I became president, we reported the Heat Commission. And I would urge you to have a look at the Heat Commission. This is in conjunction with the University of Birmingham, where I'm chancellor. That was purely serendipitous, by the way. They said, you might want to do this as your chancellor of the university as well. So some of our leading professors, but also leading people in the industry. And the recommendation we made, your report actually correlates a lot with. And that is that most people don't realize that 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions comes from heat. And half of that comes from buildings. And of the homes, of the 29 million homes in this country, only 1 million of them are up to standard now if we're ever to reach net zero by 2050. So we have to retrofit, refit these homes from gas to heat pumps, hydrogen boilers, community heating. Now that's going to require huge investment, hundreds of thousands of jobs. And we recommended there should be a national delivery body, which could be based in, say, the Midlands. And again, it's serendipity. There happens to be the National Centre for the Decarbonisation of Heat that is already up and running. And we're saying to the government, give it to them to deliver this around the country. So it's a huge challenge. And I think we could. So that's just one way I can answer your question. If I may very quickly touch on what Andrew said, I think the healthy aspect, again, in this report is fantastic. I sit on the Healthy Cities Commission at Oxford University, which, and you know, when you think of healthy cities, people just think, air pollution. It's much more than air pollution. It's the way we live. It's everything that goes around a city that makes a city special. And I can give you example after example of where it doesn't work. But also your report talks about food. And I'm patron of something probably none of you have heard of called Culinary Medicine UK. And this is an idea that came to the United States. It's as simple as this. I know there's a doctor over here, but if you do a medical degree, if you qualify as a doctor, most countries in the world is 5 years. Do you know how many days they spend being taught nutrition? 1 day out of 5 years. So we're saying now let's get the doctors in the kitchen. Let's get them to understand about nutrition, about diets, about food, so that when they diagnose, they don't just prescribe drugs and medicine. They also say, what are you eating? What should you be eating? That might help cure you as well. And it's taken off. And we've got the Royal College of GPs that have got involved. If we can implement this and get every medical student to study this, every GP, we will save many, many lives and billions and billions of pounds.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like a good idea. Luke, my question for you is, one of the things that I found interesting through the process of the systems juries was hearing how each jury said quite strongly that they want to take their own approach in their own local area. What does that look like in practice? And is there a tension with wanting an ambitious agenda from the centre?
I think in terms of what it looks like in practice, it's a bit of a cop out from the question in a way, but it really depends on the area, and it will depend on how it's shaped and designed in those local areas. I think there is a possibility of there being a tension if you do it in the wrong way. I think between that kind of national and local, or national and regional and local. But I think what the report articulates, what we've argued for, is that you need a national framework. You do need national targets. You can't leave, or shouldn't be, you know, we have a legally binding net zero target. That is right. We wouldn't want a different one for every different area in the UK. But you do need kind of national government policy to frame, to provide incentives. The petrol and diesel ban by 2030 is a really good example of government regulation helping to direct and shape the market. We hope to see similar kind of regulations set at a national level for home decarbonisation as well, but that still leaves a lot of opportunities for local areas to shape it. And you know, that is in areas like education and skills, where the needs are different in each area, and also the talent pool is different in each area as well. And there's also the case of different assets. You know, in Tees Valley in County Durham, they have old mine shafts that could potentially be used for heat decarbonisation. You have different assets in the South Wales Valleys, you have different assets in Aberdeenshire. You do need unique strategy to develop those areas to make the most of those assets, something which you could try and design it in Whitehall, but it wouldn't be the most effective policy if you did try to design it there. So it will look different in different places. But I don't think any part of the report, or indeed the citizens we spoke to, argued for no role for national government. They wanted strong leadership. They wanted a strong framework. They wanted greater power and resources within that framework to determine their own futures.
Great, thank you. That's enough questions from me. I'd like to see some hands from the audience. There is a roving mic, so do wait for it before you ask your question. And if you could just briefly say your name and in what capacity you're here, then that would be brilliant. I'll start with the gentleman at the front here, and then take these three in the middle.
For Charlotte Institute of Taxation. So just wondering, like that with the DEM conference last week, do you think policy or do the panelists agree better to reform ETS rather in preference to having a carbon tax, or are you very much in favour of a carbon tax?
Great, thank you. If you could just pass the mic behind you, that would be yes, yeah, that's right. Thanks.
My name's Vic Parks. I'm nobody. I began the conference over 25 years. I'm very simple. I'd be very interested to see this report, but one of the things I feel very strongly about is I have deep concerns about the green agenda. And on the one thing that people say about me is I'm a man of people. And I do actually see that this could be devastating to lots of people's lives. So I heard him talk about fairness and justice and things like that, and taking people with you. But I'm deeply concerned that ordinary people will have their lives devastated. I would say, one of my sayings is, we're a nation of lords, masters, serfs, peasants, and slaves. Because for me, the green agenda actually helps rich people. When they're driving their nice electric Bentleys through empty streets because all the other people have been driven off the roads, they're saying, thank you, ex-Extension Rebellion. You did enjoy the money I gave you, and that's because it's going to benefit them. I mean, there's lots of issues. It's very complicated, this whole climate change issue. If you read in the BBC, 39 ways to save the planet. There's a Bill Gates book. There are so many complicated things. The cement, the steel, the system, that. What I would say, just to finish, really, and you can see I do feel very strongly about it. But I'm shaking up a bit. Sorry. As spoken before, that's different reasons. But it needs to be, and this is something not Hillary's point, really. There needs to be a commitment that whatever you do with the green agenda, that the people at the bottom, what I call the unrich, will not be devastated or impacted too much and destroy their life. They're already facing terrible, terrible things. I live in a mixed community. I'm sorry, but I live in a mixed community. Unemployed, disabled people, teachers, police, and all the rest of it. They've all got cars. They'll all disappear. They'll be driven off the road, and that's going to affect their lives seriously. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thanks very much. If you just pass the mic to the gentleman in yellow behind you.
Yes, hello, I'm Chris Sweller, I'm a late past member and a building surveyor. So I welcome these discussions, but I am concerned, following on from the chat just heard from about the unrich. Everything up to now, and this is a big deal about, I'm talking now about decarbonising our homes in this country and buildings generally. 50% of carbon in this country is produced through energy heating our homes and buildings. What we're going to do about it, or what we're going to do about it, is a big deal. It isn't a short-term fix, which basically goes with national government with their short-termism. It's a long-term fix, and I welcome what this chat CBI was saying. We need we need to think big on this. You know, big investment, big money. I'm not talking about interest-free loans and grants to middle-class people that was the past, where you could get cheap loans to put renewables on your expensive house. I'm talking about big investment that deals and changes and transforms our homes and decarbonises our homes for ordinary folk. And it is a big deal. It does need talking about with the construction industry, because at the moment, as they say, I'll just replace your gas boiler with an air source heat pump. Well, they cost 15k anyway, and you need a very well insulated home to deliver on an air source heat pump. It isn't just stick one for another. If your home isn't insulated to current standards, then you're stuck. And so at the moment, that does mean a lot more investment in insulating those homes. It does mean smaller rooms. All this stuff is out there, but all Boris Johnson says, we'll just replace your gas boiler with an air source heat pump. That's not the point. That's not how it's going to work. And we need a whole lot of new workforce at every level, and it does mean quite a lot of semi-skilled people to go out there and insulate homes, but it does need huge investment, and I think this is where we need to put our money in the future.
Thank you very much. And there's some common themes there, so I'm going to take one more question and then look back.
I'm an electrical engineer. I'm from a technology background.
Thanks very much. My name's Helen Dennis. I'm a councillor for the public member there for climate emergency and sustainable development. And I really welcome the way in which the Commission has tried to bring together these themes, economic justice and climate justice, which we just heard, it's absolutely fundamental. We're just about to launch our own system during process, so it'll be interesting to see the direction of travel that goes in. But one of the areas of lots of areas of contentions we can see, so obviously the low traffic neighbourhoods debate, that's a point of big contention. The area in my portfolio which has the most challenge around it is what we do around house building and construction in light of the climate emergency. And every proposal, every site that comes forward, we're told by campaigners we can't build there because of the climate emergency. They'll mean different things, so some of that might be some big compromises around green space and nature. Some of it might be around the embodied carbon in the construction process, and different people will have different views on those things. I'm just interested in what the Commission looked at in that regard, and that whole intention around house building and what we do around emissions.
Excellent, thank you. And so lots of very good and important questions there. I'm going to start with Luke, and particularly on that, those two questions about how we make sure this works for everybody, including those who are worse off in society. It'd be great if you could say a bit about the fairness stuff in particular.
Thanks very much for those questions. I agree with you to a certain extent in that designed badly with policy that is either uncaring or ignorant of the impacts that it can have on people on low incomes and the poorest households, then there can be that it can exacerbate existing economic and social problems. There's no doubt about that. I think, and we say that in the report, but I think the flip side of it is that designed well, it can also bring enormous benefits, but it does mean that you need a concerted effort, as both of you have said, to ensure that policy is appropriately designed. As Karis mentioned, and I mentioned at the beginning, we had this idea of the argument, I think, called the fairness lock, where when government and any policymaker, civil servant, or politician across government is designing policy, they have to be thinking, okay, how is this going to affect those on low incomes? And the gentleman mentioned around providing loans for low-income households that need to decarbonise their house. I completely agree. There was a bit of a myth around heat pumps and energy efficiency, around the notion of a kind of able to pay market. Actually, most people do not have £10,000 or £15,000, no matter what earnings you're on, unless you're really high up. Unless you're really high up in the income scale, you don't have those kind of savings. And one of the things that the report argues for is full grants to be provided to those in fuel poor households, so that you can cover the entire cost of retrofit of introducing heat pumps. And just to add, heat pumps aren't the only answer. There's a role for heat networks. There's a role for hydrogen in limited circumstances as well. It will be a mix, and it is about making sure you get it right. But I agree, badly designed, it could have a negative impact, but actually designed well in terms of the health benefits, the lowering of fuel bills, etc. There could be huge benefits. I just, if it's all right, just wanted to touch on that question around house building. I mean, I think one of the arguments we make, and I think there is an opportunity certainly for the Labour opposition coming up, and also for the government in the government's planning reforms. So that look like they're taking them back to kind of rethink them after some of the electoral results recently. You know, the planning system at the moment does not have net zero or the restoration of nature embedded within it. Now, of course, it's right that new homes that we build need to be as near zero and decarbonised as possible, and they need to be protecting the environment. Indeed, the citizens of Thurrock I mentioned earlier that have tens of thousands of homes planned, their priority was ensuring that they recognised that homes needed to be built. They wanted them to be affordable. They wanted them to respect the local environment and be in keeping with it, and they wanted them to be as net zero as possible. But too many of the homes at the moment that we're building don't do that. So the planning system has to be designed to ensure that happens. That doesn't necessarily prevent campaigners arguing against them in different locations as well. I'll stop there.
Thanks. Hilary, I know that obviously this is a topic you're very passionate about. Do you want to comment on the meeting point?
Yes. Well, I wanted to say to you, Vic, I mean, I agree with you. This is not, if this is about driving people's cars off the road that they need, go to work, to pick up the kids, to visit their sick mum at 0 minutes notice. And she lives,
Mum, dad, 2 kids.
sure.
Put the tent in the back of the car.
Exactly. We're not, this is not, I mean, if that's what you mean by the green agenda, then we're going to have a bit of a problem, I think I would say, on our hands. I think the way of looking at it, and we debated and argued about this quite a lot, because, if you're in London, you've got a very good public transport system, and I go to the House of Commons on the tube. Unless I take a lot of stuff home, I wouldn't dream of on a regular basis driving in. You live in other parts of the country, without your car, you can't get in. There is no bus service. But the way of looking at it is to say this: why do we buy a car? Why do we have a car? Because we need the mobility for all the purposes I just described. And yet, you are walking to the conference centre this morning, you walk around the streets of Brighton, there's loads of cars parked up. They're not actually being used to go to work. They're parked up for the mobility when the people who own them want it. So question is part of the answer, saying there are other ways that you can get the instant mobility you want without ploughing thousands of pounds into a car that is parked 99% of the time on the roadside in big cities. So it's asking those questions, and we will know people who've said, actually, I've given up my car because I can be in a car club, or I can get in a cab, or whatever. There's decent public transport. That doesn't apply in all parts of the country, and I wanted to try and reassure you. And that's why the priority is, of course, to bring an end to the petrol and diesel vehicles and get to electrical vehicles, in particular for those who need their mobility in order to survive, earn a living, and so on. On the house building, well, if people are saying we can't build any houses because of the climate crisis, we've got a big problem, because there's a lot of things wrong with the house building system. I welcome what the parties said about first dibs for first-time buyers. I welcome what they said about stopping foreign buyers from buying, I think it's half of new investments, because it is ridiculous. You think particularly of London, where entire new blocks have been bought off land by investors from other parts of the world. Well, it might be fine for them. It doesn't help people to get a home to live in at a rent they can afford. And you will know that. And the third thing, and Luke and I used to work on this together in a completely different context, we have a system that doesn't, where communities do take the responsibility for identifying sites for building, they don't have the means of ensuring that that's where the houses get built, because developers come along and say, well, I know you've identified this brownfield site over here, doesn't really work for us, awfully sorry, but there's a nice field over there and we'd like to put in the planning application. Council turns it down and the planning inspectorate, because of the house building target, says, well, we're giving permission. And I can't think of a system more calculated to undermine the willingness of communities to take responsibility. Because in the end, if no planning applications are approved, there are going to be no new homes for our children and our grandchildren to live in. Where on earth do you think they're going to live? But being able to build them in the places communities say, okay, we'll have housing there, ensuring that people locally in housing need get the houses. If you did that, then in my view, you would begin to transform the attitude from NIMBYism to YIMBYism, because we need YIMBYism if we're going to tackle the housing crisis, which any MP will tell you leads to, more and more people contacting, saying, I need a house and a rent I can afford. And it leads even the least popular properties. You'll have 200 people bidding a week for them, and the most popular 500 people a week. Only one of them can get it, which leaves 449 other people still in housing that is not appropriate to their needs.
Thank you. Angela, can you pick up the ETS carbon pricing question?
I might be able to pick that one up, but can I start with the housing one as well, just to follow on from this, the housing one that Chris was mentioning, in respect of how do we get to the point that we're not just having sort of middle class and relatively richer people in this market. One of the things I think we need to look at is definitely the funding system, but the other thing I think that's quite important, and it's come through some of the early local authority schemes, is trust and guarantees for the quality of work, because we've seen too many instances of low quality internal insulation actually giving people problems with mold in their homes. We've got the horrendous Grenfell story. You get a kind of a system where people aren't confident in the quality of the work that's going to be done to their homes, even if they get some support to have it done, they don't want it done. And we need to build enough trust and confidence, with something like, a government-backed guarantee that if the work in your home isn't done properly, if it was paid for by the local authority or whoever did it, you can get it fixed. Because otherwise, people don't want to have things that even when they're given for free, where they might end up with something worse. And we know that when there was the early days of double glazing, there were kind of cowboy installers, and we haven't got time to kind of go through. Let's build up the trusted trader schemes and find out who we need to. Have a system that people can really feel lots of confidence, and that often affects the people who've got less agency. It's the person, like the local authority, decided for you what was going to happen in your house, or your landlord decided for you. So we need to sort those things out, and I think that's a key thing. On the ETS better than carbon tax, I don't have the complete answer, but one of the things that I've seen as a principle for the kind of work we've been advocating for in sector changes is where you're trying to move a sector, sometimes you can move it with a tax if there's a ready alternative, but putting taxes on can often just drive costs, and you end up with the richest just pay the tax and carry on as normal. And where actually what you sometimes need is subsidies for alternatives to really get them to a point that they're affordable, well practiced, understood, and then you start moving people over, because there's nothing worse than just squeezing the system when there isn't an alternative ready for people to go. And that's, I think, one principle. The other principle is going back to the nature point. Carbon taxes aren't the only solution here. So one of the things that I'm very worried about, and it might come quite soon after COP, is carbon border adjustment mechanisms are being proposed. Absolutely fine for all the industrial goods where carbon and greenhouse gases are the main issue. But one of the things that could happen in the UK is we propose some kind of a carbon border adjustment for food. And that kind of system might work well for sort of some fruits and vegetables, but for your beef and lamb, low carbon beef and lamb can sometimes be the most appalling animal welfare, intensively produced lamb. It's low carbon per kilogram because you've grown it incredibly quickly. Apologies for my language. It hasn't had time to burp or fart. It's in the abattoir and in the thing, and that's a kind of horrendous farming system. But it's not at all what we need in terms of moving to a greener farming system. So carbon taxes work for some industrial goods, but not for farming, and subsidise to create an alternative before you whack the taxes on, because otherwise you just push cost and not a solution.
Thanks very much, Angela. I'm going to go to another round of questions quickly, but I do want to welcome Polly.
Thank you. I'm apologies for lateness.
Hilary has had to go, unfortunately, but we have Polly.
Like the weatherman.
Do you want to offer any kind of remarks on the report of what you've heard so far?
Yeah, unfortunately, I know a little bit about this because Luke and I have been talking about this for a long time. I'm the chief executive of UK 100, which is a network of local leaders who've made a commitment to act on clean energy, climate and clean air. And there's now over 100 local leaders across England, Scotland and Wales who've made this commitment. More than 60 of them have made a commitment to get to net zero on their own assets by 2030. And across their whole communities by 2045. Now, it's clear from the conversations that I've just listened into that we know that those challenges are profound. Our leaders know that too. They are deliberately going further and faster than the government because we know the most ambitious will need to, because there will be laggards, but also they deliberately know that they will not be able to achieve that without profound change to the rules and regulations that are currently governing and limiting their ability to be able to achieve what is required. The key thing I think is worthwhile, and it goes to some of the conversations you've had about building homes and so forth. There are two big sectors that need to be decarbonised, and that's heat and transport, and they happen in places. And we need to be able to shape markets for those in the same way that we shaped markets to decarbonise the power sector. When we look at the fact that we now have 40% of our electricity generated by renewables, that didn't happen by magic, right? Sometimes you'd think from the way the Prime Minister discusses it, it did. It happened actually by consistent support for that industry over 3 or 4 different political administrations with different political stripes, with different kinds of subsidies, and therefore they managed to enable those prices to tumble. If we want something similar to happen on homes and heat and on transport, we need to have a similar kind of approach, which is about shaping markets. And those, particularly on homes and heat, will be challenging. Local authorities have a particular role to play because they are leaders in their places. They are ones who know their communities best. They can convene the decision makers, not only those who are directly elected like themselves, but also people who can bring firepower, intellectual firepower and resources to be able to make those changes. But it will require them to use all of the powers within their own, which they've currently got. We have published a report understanding and analysing those powers, but we've also, from that report, understood where the limits are to those powers. And that's why we think there should be a net zero local powers bill, which wraps up the regulatory and legislative changes that will be required at national level to enable the transformation of our places to net zero. That will mean that those people in Thurrock that Luke was talking about have an opportunity to shape the decisions that are made in their communities, are not done in a top-down way, and therefore they can start to reap the benefits now rather than this being about targets decades away with benefits that feel like they're happening to somebody else.
Thank you very much, Polly.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick observations on the points made. At the CBI, we support greening the tax system with a policy roadmap that places net zero at its core, but not one-off taxes. And I think an example is business rates. I mean, the business rates desperately needs to be reformed in this country. They are far too high. And in many cases, they disincentivize investment, particularly when it comes to green investment to buildings. And so we need to reform business rates. And you mentioned about transport. At the University of Birmingham, we won a Queen's Award recently for our railway department. And our railway department has developed the first retrofitted hydrogen-powered train. And it's up and running. And in fact, at COP26, we will have this train running in Glasgow to demonstrate that. And that, can you imagine the future when you have hydrogen-powered trains? It'd be absolutely marvelous. And it's there, it's real.
Thank you. Questions? You can see a show of hands. So I'll take the woman at the back here and in yellow there. So.
It's Jenny Sanson from County Change Trust. I was very interested in following the debate around including local people in, there's a consultative processes with government. So thinking about citizens' juries and all those sorts of things. However, I'm thinking about equality and just transition. Could you talk a little bit more about community asset ownership? And by that I mean where a local community or community organisation would own and benefit from a big asset such as a wind turbine or possibly if local people are involved in a community land trust or a housing association which they own, could they be financially controlled and benefit from the savings which were implemented through greening those homes, for example? Yeah, I've got a couple of specific examples. It would be great to hear more about how you, Luke, and Polly in particular, how you feel that could be possibly scaled up.
Great. If you just pass the mic.
I'm Hetty from Cambridge. We hear a lot about protecting air and water, but how can we recognise we need to protect soil?
Great. I'll take one more. There's a gentleman at the back there holding the vote. And
Thank you. Colin Shannon from Scotland with me and founder of the Alt Party Parliament Group on Climate Change. About 15 years ago, I was at a meeting, National Grid was speaking, and just in terms of our current gas crisis, they said 15 years ago that we could get 50% of our domestic energy from methane harvested from water treatment plants. It's an example, I thought, of where the government failed to act in the market to force water companies through Ofwat, the regulator, through regulation to measure a commitment of water companies to start generating electricity. And an example is the Oxford Water at Eldington works near York. They've been doing it for decades just to power their own plants. That is an example, I think, which sums up the failure of the last government, the last Labour government, summed up in the phrase, we don't need winners. Let's be technology blind. But I think that clearly has to end. And the next Labour government has to start picking winners and forcing them faster than the market wants to. I'll just finish with another example which comes to mind. We bailed out the banks, but we didn't tell them when we owned them to stop investing in fossil fuels. There's another example of a Labour government thinking that the market knows best. And I hope that will be addressed in this report.
fantastic, thank you. So good set of questions there. Angela, do you want to start with soil?
I would love to start with soil. That's a fantastic question. Yes, I think it's often overlooked. I spent my early career in the East of England Development Agency and know a lot about the concerns that have been expressed about Lincolnshire and the fens and the loss of the soil and then the loss of the quality of the soil. And we have, I think, a group of farmers who understands that and they hopefully are going to be empowered to be able to farm in a way that not only is producing food but restoring the soil, which is I'm not a scientist in this, but the kind of the basis of our ecology. The quality of the soil is not that only to produce food, but it's also an enormously beneficial carbon sink. If we can farm it in a way that is bringing carbon back into it rather than extracting all the way. So yes, we're very keen. I keep going back to the trade point. That if, as we try and encourage our farmers to invest and innovate in new ways of farming, we don't immediately completely make them lose confidence that that will be rewarded by them knowing they're going to face imports that come in where we just aren't saying anything about the environmental provisions that have to be made for the production of the food that's coming from other countries. And if there aren't regulations to protect water, soil, air quality, some of that food could be enormously increasing our environmental footprint. So yes, I think it's something the UK could do very well. We are sort of on course to do it with our domestic policy, but it's now Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Secretary of State, who we need to say, look, food and farming is really key. It might not be your most important economic sector, but it's a really important safe sector for nature and climate, and you need to make sure that you're doing deals that don't undermine policy at home. And can I say one thing as well on the point about methane and gas? I think there's a really interesting set of kind of industrial opportunities that emerge that people have seen but haven't happened because regulation has got in the way. And I've heard people lament for years that like water regulation, electricity regulation gets those industries in a position they just can't do things that would otherwise make sense. So I very, very much agree that we need to be able to start developing ways of kind of cross-fertilizing. So industrial strategy, which is kind of gone out of favour with this government, I think now, but industrial strategy does that. And there was a great piece of work I would encourage you to look at that was out of UCL, which was the Green Innovation Policy Commission, which had water industry, electricity industry together looking at some of those things. But I agree, it's these kind of missed opportunities which are sometimes almost free if we can just get things connected. That we can't be passing them up when we've got such an urgent set of goals to meet.
Thanks very much. Karen, I wondered if you could comment on the role of government in relation to the market.
Yes, on regulation, I think if you just look back at the lessons on regulation, I remember when I was the founding chairman of the UK India Business Council, I used to boast about our light touch regulation. And then we had the financial crisis. And before that, it was a very happy merry-go-round, and then it became a blame-go-round. And we realized that the light touch regulation was not the right touch regulation. And in this crisis, in the pandemic, I've seen the power of having dynamic regulation. So for example, the vaccine development, the MHRA, which normally could take months, if not years to approve things, was doing it in weeks. So I think we need to have robust regulation, but also dynamic regulation. And you can apply it to what we've just been discussing. And then on the soil, if I give you a quick example, I think the report talks about, in effect, what is a circular economy. And in producing, I produce beer, one of my business, Cobra Beer, that I founded, and water. There's a lot of wastewater. And it's so important how you treat that wastewater and how you use as little water as possible to make the beer. And in India, for example, one of the breweries that we were working with, we would give the wastewater to the local farmers to use. And we'd also treat it. And we would treat it so well that we would have ponds with fish flourishing in that water. When it comes to farmers, would have rice husks that they would just burn away and waste. We buy the rice husk, and we have rice husk boilers that actually use that to create energy. And so you're giving farmers extra income, and you're also using a natural source. So there are many ways in which you can actually be very conscious and practice the circular economy.
Thank you. Luke, I wondered if you could touch on both the role of government in the market and also the question about community efforts.
Yeah, so taking the first one, I mean, just in the area of climate and environment, there are clear examples of the role of government being successful. Like offshore wind has been a phenomenal success, and it has succeeded because government has intervened, has used contracts for difference. I mean, they're not perfect, but which has been an example of government setting ambitions and targets and intervening, and then driving market innovation and market investment. And it's that kind of, I guess, dynamic regulation, that kind of partnership approach between government and business that can be so effective in the transition. I mean, we would completely agree, and indeed the report, I think, if you read it, would agree with the sentiments you made, that you can't just leave this transition to the market. It won't succeed. I would argue, not just will we not go at the appropriate pace that is needed, we won't go as fast as is required, but it certainly won't be fair, because the market will not deliver the kind of fairness lock that we were talking about earlier, nor will it ensure that those on the lowest incomes won't lose out or indeed will benefit. So you do need a market shaping, a market intervening role from government in order to shape it and also protect people and ensure it's a fair transition. On the point about community asset ownership, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think there is a clear role for that. One of the things we did a report on community climate action, and what that report showed is actually there are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of communities taking action on the climate across the country, and they're not just it's not just where they've got a say over what's happening in their local area. They actually have genuine, as you said, ownership over the assets. We work with local trust on one that they're doing called Ambition Lawrence Western, and many of these communities actually, so they're in what local trust called left behind neighbourhoods, and actually they haven't entered it from a perspective of we want to solve the climate crisis, we want to reduce emissions. They've entered it from the perspective of we want to reduce energy bills, we want to see benefits for our local communities, and actually that's engaged a wider demographic of people who are interested in what environmentalists call co-benefits, but what a lot of the public just call the benefits, the jobs, the low fuel bills, the economic opportunities. And actually, there are lots of opportunities. That's where the focus should be. There are lots of community activities that are going on like that, that where they own the assets, they are accruing greater benefits from the transition for their local community, which is then paying for other things. However, I do think most of them are doing it against the tide. I think, as Polly said, whether it's at community level, the local authority level, it's not recognised in policy. Policy is not designed to empower either local communities or local authorities to do more in their local area. So we do need changes in regulation. We do need devolution to local government, to metro mayors, and we also want to see, as we've argued, those powers also devolve to local communities to give them a greater power and ability to actually own the assets, whether it's a community land trust or it's kind of local community wind or solar generation as well.
Thanks, Luke. Polly, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I mean, the community stuff is really important for energising and mobilising people who are already energised and mobilised. I'm quite interested in knocking out megatons of CO2 from the economy and managing to create jobs. So I want to do stuff on a big scale. And I think, therefore, what you need to look at is doing stuff on a scale which also includes some accountability, some democratic ownership and so forth. Steve Rotherham, who's the Metro Mayor of Liverpool City Region, speaks about this very powerfully. He says they can see the wind farm off the coast of Merseyside, and yet they don't own that wind farm at all. And probably the only jobs that really came to Merseyside as a result of that wind farm were the hotel receptionists and cleaning staff who hosted the Danish engineers who installed the wind farm. And we know we have got a gap there, which we are not filling, not only in terms of ownership of those assets at a large enough scale and democratically accountable, and also an industrial strategy that will mean that we have the skills here and the facilities here to be able to create those jobs and to create that renewable energy. Yes, it is happening in places. It's not like we're just buying everything in. We've got in significant industrial clusters, particularly on the East Coast, around Humberside and so forth. We do and will need so much more. And I would say, generally speaking, on the community element of it, if anyone here is democratically elected at any level of government, when anyone comes along to you and says we're going to put some kind of clean energy up, do not be bought off with a bloody playground, okay? Hang tough and get some proper benefits back from your community, because they are generating a significant amount of income from those renewables, and you need to be able to see that. This is again an opportunity for common cause and political consensus. I know there are Tory MPs who can see that their communities are not benefiting from having the roads dug up in order to be able to connect up those big wind farms off the coast, and they want to see some benefit for all the kind of disruption. Now, they might not get to what I'm talking about in terms of ownership, but they do understand about community benefit, and they won't want to be bought off with playgrounds either. So understand what those benefits need to look like, and understand that what we're really talking about here is a decentralized and decarbonised electricity system, which requires significant change to the rules at Ofgem level and beyond, and understand that there is an opportunity for political consensus on this, rather than thinking that, particularly because the reality of the science is that we can't wait for a Tory Labour government, we have to get on with this stuff now.
Thank you, Polly. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, and I want to make sure you can get off to your next 2 p.m. events. So just to say a huge thank you to all of you for coming along, for your questions. A huge thank you to our panel as well, including Hilary, who's had to leave. And just to say, do read the report. As Luke said, it's in different formats. You've got a video, you've got a beautifully designed digital report, or you've got the full 70,000 words, I think. If you're that interested. So a huge thank you to everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very good to see you. I'll see you next one. Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Right. How are you doing? Really nice to meet you. Yes. Really good to speak about